My name is Sarah, and I'm 32. I sat at my cousin Amanda's engagement dinner, cradling my toddler Lucas, while laughter filled the air. The glow of chandeliers cast golden flecks across the linen tablecloths, but my heart was heavy, pressed down by an unease I couldn't shake. I heard Amanda whisper, she'd never end up like me, a single mom. The room erupted in chuckles, sharp and careless. My uncle's voice cut through, saying men don't want used goods. Even my mom laughed, her soft giggle a betrayal I hadn't expected. I forced a smile, my fingers tightening around Lucas's toy car, hiding the ache that bloomed in my chest. Have you ever felt judged for being you? I'd love to know where you're watching from. Like and subscribe if this resonates. The banquet hall buzzed with clinking forks and soft jazz, the notes weaving through the chatter like a lazy current. I felt like I was on an island, tucked at a corner table with Lucas dozing in my lap, his tiny hand clutching his toy car, its red paint chipped from love. I traced its curves to steady myself, the plastic cool against my fingertips. The family's laughter from the main table still echoed in my head, each chuckle a reminder I didn't belong. I adjusted my dress, a simple navy thing I'd worn to a dozen events, its hem frayed from too many washes, hoping it hid how out of place I felt in this sea of pressed suits and sparkling gowns. Nathan, Amanda's fiancé, stood to give a toast. His voice was smooth, praising family and love, but his gaze slid past me like I was a shadow. I caught my cousin Rachel whispering to her husband Mark, their eyes flicking my way, her lips curled in that pitying smile she'd mastered since Lucas was born. Once she'd promised to be there when Greg walked out, her hugs warm and certain. Now she looked at me like I was a broken vase, pretty but useless, her judgment a quiet sting. My throat tightened and I sipped water, the glass cold against my palm, trying to push down the hurt. I shifted Lucas, his warmth grounding me, and tried to focus on the floral centerpieces, their petals too perfect, their scent cloying against the chaos in my chest. Then my mom Diane appeared, her perfume sharp as she leaned close, her silk scarf brushing my arm. You should dress nicer, Sarah, she said, her voice low but pointed like a needle. It helps when you're looking to catch a man. She glanced at Lucas, her eyes softening, but not enough to hide the judgment, as if he were a weight I'd chosen wrong. I forced a nod, my jaw tight, feeling the familiar pang of her blame, sharp as ever. Before I could respond, Lucas stirred his juice cup, tipping. A splash hit my dress, staining the fabric dark, seeping cold against my thigh. My Aunt Patricia, seated nearby, let out a loud sigh, her pearls glinting as she leaned forward. Kids are such a handful when you're on your own, aren't they? She said, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. The table around her tittered their smirks like pinpricks, and I felt their eyes on me, picking apart my every move. I dabbed at the stain with a napkin, my cheeks burning, and mumbled something about it being fine, my voice barely audible. Lucas blinked up at me, oblivious, and I kissed his forehead, hiding my shaking hands. Across the room, a young server, Clara, moved quietly, refilling glasses, her apron crisp against the dim light. She caught my eye and offered a small smile, then slipped a cookie onto Lucas's plate, its chocolate chips gleaming. It was a tiny gesture, but it felt like a lifeline, a reminder that not everyone saw me as a failure. I mouthed a thank you, my voice too tight to speak, my eyes stinging with gratitude. Clara nodded, her braid swinging as she moved on, and I clung to that kindness like a raft in a storm. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down to see a text from my brother Ethan. Not coming, he wrote. Can't deal with family drama. I stared at the words, my stomach sinking, the screen's glow harsh in the dim room. Ethan was the only one who'd ever defended me, but lately he'd been pulling away, leaving me to face this alone. I typed a quick reply. Okay, but my fingers hovered, wanting to beg him to show up to be the brother I needed. I didn't send it. Instead, I tucked the phone away, feeling the weight of his absence settle next to Mom's words and Patricia's jab, each one a stone in my chest. The music swelled, and couples drifted to the dance floor, their laughter bright and careless, their shadows swaying against the velvet drapes. I stayed put, rocking Lucas, my dress still damp, my heart heavier than before. Rachel's pity, Mom's advice, Ethan's text, they were all small cuts, each one stinging more than the last, carving out a space where doubt lived. I wondered if this was how it would always be, me on the outside, judged for the life I'd chosen. Lucas sighed in his sleep, and I held him closer, determined to stay strong, even as the room spun on without me. The jazz faded into a slower tune, and I watched the couples sway, their silhouettes blurring under the dimming lights, the air thick with the scent of candle wax. Lucas's soft snores anchored me, but my chest felt like it was caving in, a hollow ache spreading. I smoothed his hair, trying to shake the sting of Mom's words and Patricia's smirk. The tablecloth beneath my fingers was crisp, almost too perfect, like everything in this room was meant to highlight how I didn't fit. I glanced at the main table where Amanda held court, her laughter sharp and bright, cutting through the air like a blade. Rachel and Mark were still there now, chatting with my cousin Harper, their glasses clinking softly. I caught Harper's eye, hoping for a flicker of warmth, a trace of the cousin who'd once shared my secrets. But she quickly looked away. Her lips pursed her earrings, catching the light as she turned. I remembered sleepovers with her, giggling over magazines, dreaming of futures that felt endless, our bare feet tangled in blankets. Now she treated me like a stranger, her silence louder than any insult. I shifted in my seat, the wooden chair creaking, and tucked Lucas's blanket tighter around him, as if it could shield us both from the coldness in her gaze. Clara, the server, passed by again, clearing plates, her movements quick but gentle. She paused, her eyes soft, and whispered, "You okay?" Her voice was barely audible over the music, but it carried a warmth that pierced the fog. I nodded, but my throat was too tight to answer, my fingers brushing the damp stain on my dress. She squeezed my shoulder before moving on, her touch, brief but steady, like a promise someone still saw me. I clung to that even as the room seemed to close and the chatter growing louder, more suffocating, a wall I couldn't break through. My phone buzzed again, but it wasn't Ethan this time. It was a group chat notification from the family planning a post-dinner gathering at a nearby bar, their messages bubbling with excitement. My name wasn't mentioned, the exclusion sinking in like a slow bruise, sharp and tender. I'd always been the one to organize reunions, to call everyone together. My texts met with eager replies. Now I was an afterthought, left out of their plans, my absence unnoticed. I locked the phone and set it face down, my hands trembling, the screen's faint glow lingering in my vision. Across the room, Nathan finished another toast, his arm around Amanda, her diamond ring catching the light like a tiny star. She beamed, and the family clapped their approval, ringing out a chorus that didn't include me. I felt a pang, not for her happiness, but for how easily they celebrated her while I sat here invisible. My presence, a footnote. I wondered if they'd ever clapped for me, even before Lucas, or if I'd always been the one they overlooked, the one who didn't fit their story. My Aunt Patricia stood, her wine glass, raised, her voice carrying over the crowd. "Everyone come on," she said, waving the family toward the center for a group photo. I waited, my breath shallow, hoping someone would notice me, call me over, but no one did. Rachel and Harper shuffled past, their dresses rustling, their perfume trailing. Mom followed, her heels clicking, her eyes avoiding mine. I stayed put, my arms around Lucas, feeling like a ghost in my own family. Patricia's voice carried again, saying, "Let's get the real family in this one," and my stomach twisted, the words landing like a slap, sharp and deliberate. I wasn't sure if she meant it, but they cut all the same. I looked down at Lucas, his cheeks flushed from sleep, and whispered, "We're enough, buddy." My voice wavered, but I meant it even as doubt crept in, cold and heavy. Was I enough for him, raising him in a world that saw us as less? I pushed the thought away, but it lingered sharp and unyielding, a shadow I couldn't shake. Clara circled back, setting a fresh glass of water in front of me, the ice clinking softly. Her eyes held mine for a moment, and she said, "You're doing great." You know her voice, a quiet anchor. I forced a smile, but inside, I was unraveling the weight of their dismissal, pressing harder, like a tide pulling me under. The photo session ended, and the family dispersed, their laughter rising again, carefree and cutting. I watched them, my heart pounding, knowing this night was far from over. Amanda's voice cut through, calling for another round of drinks, her tone bright but brittle. I braced myself, sensing the tension building like a storm. I couldn't outrun its edges, dark and heavy. The music shifted to a lively beat, and the dance floor filled with twirling couples, their shadows flickering against the velvet drapes, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and perfume. I stayed rooted at my corner table, Lucas's blanket soft under my fingers as I rocked him gently, his weight a quiet comfort. The family's laughter from the photo session still stung, Patricia's words about the real family looping in my mind, each repetition a fresh bruise. I scanned the room, hoping for a friendly face, a sign I wasn't as alone as I felt. But all I saw were turned backs and clinking glasses, the celebration marching on without me, a world I couldn't touch. Amanda broke away from the main table, her heels clicking as she approached, her emerald dress catching the light. Her smile was tight, like she was doing me a favor by stopping. "Sarah," she said, sitting across from me, her hands folded neatly. "You're so brave, raising him alone. It must be exhausting though, right?" Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes gleamed with something sharp, like she was sizing me up for a story she'd tell later, a cautionary tale for her friends. I forced a polite nod, my stomach churning her words, twisting like a knife. They weren't concern. They were a jab, painting me as a tired cliché, the single mom who'd never measure up. I swallowed hard, the memory of Greg flashing unbidden, his face cold, as he'd called me too much work when I told him I was pregnant, his suitcase already packed by the door. Amanda's pity felt like his voice all over again, telling me I'd chosen a life too heavy to carry. My fingers tightened around Lucas's blanket, the fabric rough against my skin, and I said, "We're doing fine," my voice steadier than I felt, though it trembled at the edges. She tilted her head like she didn't believe me and stood smoothing her dress with a practiced flick. "Well, keep at it," she said before gliding back to Nathan, her laughter ringing out as she rejoined the crowd, sharp and untouchable. I exhaled, my chest tight, and glanced at Lucas, his curls damp against his forehead. His toy car had slipped to the floor, its wheels glinting under the table. I bent to pick it up, my hands shaking the cold tile, grounding me for a moment. The room felt smaller, the air thick with chatter, and the clink of silverware, a cacophony that pressed against me. Clara, the server, was clearing plates nearby, her braids swinging as she worked, her apron smudged with dessert crumbs. She caught my eye and mouthed, "You got this," before moving on. Her quiet support a tether, but it couldn't drown out the noise in my head, a chorus of doubt and blame. Then my Uncle Harold appeared. His tie loosened, a glass of bourbon in hand, the amber liquid catching the light. He leaned against my table, his voice low, but cutting the smell of liquor sharp. "You know Sarah men want women without baggage," he said, nodding toward Lucas, his words heavy with the same blame I'd heard for years. "Should have stayed with Greg, worked it out." He added, his tone casual, like he was commenting on the weather. I stared at him, my pulse pounding, unable to speak, my throat locked tight. He shrugged, like he'd just offered friendly advice, and walked away, joining the dancers with a chuckle, his glass raised as if nothing had happened. I pressed my palm to my forehead, trying to steady my breathing, the room spinning slightly. Harold's words echoed Mom's earlier jab about dressing nicer. Both of them pinning my loneliness on me, like Lucas was a mistake I'd made, not the best part of my life. I looked at the dance floor where Rachel was swaying with Mark, her head thrown back in laughter, her earrings sparkling. I remembered her promising to visit after Lucas was born. Her texts full of heart emojis, but she'd stopped calling her silence now as loud as Harold's judgment, a betrayal I hadn't seen coming. The band played on the notes, blurring into a dull roar, pressing against my temples. I felt rage simmering hot and unfamiliar, but I pushed it down, afraid of what might spill out if I let it. Lucas stirred, his eyes fluttering open, and I whispered, "It's okay, buddy. Go back to sleep." My voice soft but strained. But inside, I was screaming, the weight of their words piling higher, threatening to bury me under their scorn. The dancers spun faster, their laughter weaving into the music, a wall of sound that pressed against me, relentless. I clutched Lucas's toy car, its edges digging into my palm, as I tried to anchor myself, the plastic warm from my grip. The air was thick with the scent of roasted lamb and wine, but it felt suffocating, like the room was swallowing me whole, its walls closing in. I scanned the crowd, desperate for a lifeline, a single glance that didn't judge, but every face was turned away, caught up in the celebration. I wasn't part of their joy, a barrier I couldn't cross. I spotted Rachel again, now chatting with Harper near the dessert table, their plates piled with chocolate cake. Their heads were close, their whispers sharp, and I caught my name in their hushed tones, a sound that pricked my skin. I strained to hear my heart pounding, and then Harper's voice carried over, clear and cold, slicing through the music. "She chose this, keeping that kid," she said, her fork poised over her plate. Rachel nodded, adding she could have given him up. Started over her words, casual but cruel, like they were dissecting a stranger. The words hit like a blade, tearing open old wounds from the nights I'd cried over choosing Lucas, knowing he was my heart, not a mistake. I'd trusted Rachel, shared my fears with her when Greg left, but now she was carving me up for gossip, reducing my life to a cautionary tale. My hands trembled, and I tucked the toy car into Lucas's blanket, afraid I'd snap it in half. I wanted to scream, to tell them I'd chosen love, not failure, but my voice felt trapped, buried under their judgment, a weight I couldn't lift. I glanced at Mom, hoping she'd sense my pain, but she was laughing with Carl, her new husband, their hands intertwined, her bracelet glinting. Carl raised his glass for a toast, his voice booming about starting fresh, building a new life. His words polished but hollow. His eyes flicked to me just for a second, and I saw it, a flash of pity, maybe contempt, like I was the shadow of Mom's old mistakes, a reminder she'd rather forget. My breath caught the room tilting as his words sank in, heavy and unyielding. I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to block out the noise, but it was everywhere. Rachel's gossip, Carl's toast, the band's relentless rhythm, a cacophony that drowned me. In my purse, I caught sight of an old photo, me and Amanda as kids, braiding each other's hair at a family picnic, the grass tickling our knees. We'd been inseparable, promising to always have each other's backs, our giggles echoing under the oak trees. Now she was the one leading the charge, her earlier words about my exhausting life ringing in my ears, a betrayal sharper than I'd expected. The photo felt like a lie, a reminder of a bond that no longer existed, its edges worn from time. Clara moved through the crowd, balancing a tray of empty glasses, her apron swaying. She paused near my table, her eyes searching mine, and set down a small plate of fruit for Lucas, the grapes gleaming under the light. She didn't speak, but her quiet presence was a fleeting comfort, like a crack of light in a storm, warm and brief. I nodded, my lips tight, unable to say how much it meant, my throat too raw. She slipped away, and I was alone again, the weight of the night pressing harder, like a tide pulling me under. My phone buzzed a notification from Ethan, but I couldn't bring myself to check it, the screen's light too harsh. His absence was another wound proof that even the people I loved most were slipping away, leaving me to fight alone. I looked at Lucas, his chest rising and falling, his innocence untouched by their scorn, and felt a surge of guilt, sharp and relentless. Was I dragging him into a life where he'd always be judged just like me? The thought clawed at me raw and unyielding as the dancer spun on, oblivious to the storm building inside me, its edges dark and jagged. The band slowed to a waltz, and the room's energy shifted as guests settled for the evening's final toasts, their glasses glinting in the soft light. I sat rigid, Lucas's blanket damp under my fingers from clutching it too long, the fabric rough against my skin. The weight of Rachel's gossip, Carl's toast, and Amanda's smug pity had left me raw like an exposed nerve, my pulse loud in my ears. I glanced at the exit, my bag already half-packed, its strap tangled ready to slip out before anyone could hurt me more. But something held me, a stubborn spark that refused to let them win, flickering deep in my chest. Amanda took the microphone, her voice bright, as she thanked everyone for coming, her words polished and warm. She looked radiant, her curls catching the chandelier's glow, her dress shimmering like liquid emerald, and the crowd clapped their adoration, washing over her like a tide. Then she turned, her eyes locking on me, sharp and deliberate, and said, "I'm just so lucky to have Nathan, not like some who end up alone struggling." Her smile was sharp, a blade disguised as sweetness, and the room burst into laughter, the sound crashing over me like a wave, relentless and cold. My cheeks burned, and I ducked my head, hoping Lucas wouldn't wake to see me crumbling, my fingers trembling against his blanket. I felt every pair of eyes on me, their chuckles slicing deeper than words, each one a fresh cut. My mom's laugh joined in soft but unmistakable a sound that twisted my heart like a knife. She was supposed to be my safe place, the one who'd shield me, but there she was, siding with them. Her giggle a betrayal I couldn't unhear. I pressed my lips together, fighting the tears that stung my eyes. Their heat sharp against my lids, and smoothed Lucas's hair. His steady breathing, the only thing keeping me from bolting my legs, twitching with the urge to run. My Uncle Harold clinked his glass, his voice booming over the fading laughter, his bourbon raised high. "Some women just don't know how to keep a man," he said, his tone mocking like a toast to my failure. The room roared again, and I felt myself shrinking, my breath shallow, like the air had been sucked out, the chandelier's light too harsh above me. I wanted to disappear, to erase myself from their story. But Lucas's weight in my lap kept me grounded, a reminder I couldn't run, his warmth a quiet anchor. I noticed Clara near the back, her tray still, her face tight with something like anger, her knuckles pale against the tray's edge. She shook her head slightly, as if she felt the injustice too, her braid catching the light, but it wasn't enough to stop the tide. My hands shook as I adjusted Lucas's blanket, my mind racing, thoughts tumbling like leaves in a storm. I'd endured their jabs all night, but this was different. Public, deliberate, a spectacle meant to bury me. I wondered if this was what they'd always thought, if every family gathering had been a stage for my failure, their laughter, a script I hadn't seen. The laughter died down, and Nathan stood his chair scraping against the floor, a sharp sound that cut through the haze. The room hushed, glasses pausing midair as he took the microphone from Amanda, his fingers steady but his jaw tight. His eyes scanned the crowd before landing on me, intense and unyielding. "I think they should know something," he said, his voice low but firm, cutting through the silence like a blade, each word heavy with purpose. My heart stopped, confusion mixing with dread as he started walking toward me, every step echoing in the stillness, the room holding its breath. Nathan's footsteps echoed as he crossed the polished floor, the room so quiet I could hear my own pulse, a frantic rhythm in my ears. I gripped Lucas's blanket, my knuckles white, the fabric bunched in my fist, as every head turned to follow him, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Amanda's smile faltered, her hand frozen on her wine glass, the stem catching the light. Nathan stopped beside my table, his eyes steady on mine, and the air felt charged like the moment before a storm breaks heavy with unspoken weight. I braced myself, unsure if he was about to defend me or pile on more shame, my heart caught in a tangle of hope and fear. He turned to the crowd, his voice clear and unwavering, each word deliberate. "Sarah's the reason I'm standing here," he said. "When my family lost everything, she paid my college tuition, no questions asked. She didn't want credit, but I can't let her sit here while you laugh." The words hung heavy, each one a stone dropped into the silence rippling through the room. My breath caught, shock rippling through me sharp and cold. I'd kept that secret for years. A quiet choice I'd made when Nathan was just a struggling kid, long before he met Amanda. A decision born from seeing his potential, not expecting anything in return. The room stayed hushed, but I felt the shift eyes now boring into me, not with pity, but something sharper, like I'd disrupted their script, rewritten their story. Amanda's face twisted, her cheeks flushing as she glanced at Nathan, then me, her lips parting, but no words coming out, her ring glinting like a warning. Rachel and Harper exchanged looks, their hands still cake, forgotten on their plates, their forks abandoned. My mom stared at her lap, her fingers twisting her napkin into knots, and Carl's toast about fresh starts seemed to curdle in the air, his confidence deflated. I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was exposed, my private act of kindness laid bare for judgment. A secret I'd guarded now, a spectacle. Nathan's words were meant to lift me up, but they felt like a spotlight burning away the last of my armor, leaving me raw. I wanted to thank him, to say something, but my throat was locked. My thoughts, a tangle of gratitude and betrayal, a storm I couldn't navigate. Why now? Why in front of everyone, where it hurt as much as it helped? I looked at Lucas, still asleep, his innocence, a stark contrast to the chaos around us, his curls soft against my arm. Clara stood frozen near the dessert table, her tray trembling slightly, her eyes wide with something like awe, her braids still as she watched. But even her quiet support couldn't soften the blow, couldn't dull the edge of this moment. The family's silence was deafening, their earlier laughter now, a ghost haunting the room, a shadow of their cruelty. I felt their stares, some curious, some resentful, as if I'd stolen their narrative, upended their easy judgments. Amanda's jaw tightened, and I saw a flicker of something, jealousy, maybe, or shame cross her face, her eyes darting away. My chest ached like my heart was splintering under the weight of it all, a fracture I couldn't mend. Nathan stepped back, his gaze still on me, but I couldn't meet his eyes, my vision blurred with unshed tears. I was grateful, furious, humiliated all at once, and the emotions churned, leaving me hollow, a shell battered by their words and his truth. The room felt like it was closing in, the chandelier's light too bright, the waltz's final notes too loud, a cacophony I couldn't escape. I held Lucas closer, my anchor in the storm, his warmth the only steady thing. But inside, I was breaking, with no way out in sight. The silence in the banquet hall was thick, Nathan's words still hanging like smoke, heavy and acrid. I sat, frozen, Lucas's warmth against me, the only thing keeping me from shattering his blanket, soft but damp from my grip. The family's eyes burned into me, some wide with shock, others narrowed as if I'd cheated them out of their easy judgment, rewritten their story in a way they hadn't expected. Amanda's flushed face and Mom's twisted napkin were snapshots of a moment I hadn't asked for, a scene I hadn't scripted. I wanted to shrink away, to vanish into the shadows, but something stirred, a flicker of defiance, small but growing like a spark in dry grass, catching the wind. I took a shaky breath, my hands steadying on Lucas's back, his heartbeat a quiet rhythm against my own. I felt the weight of years spent swallowing their words, letting their pity and scorn shape me. No more. I stood my chair, scraping softly against the floor, the sound sharp in the hush. The room's attention snapped to me, a weight I felt, but didn't fear. Lucas stirred his eyes half open, and I shifted him to my hip, his blanket trailing its edges, brushing my leg. My voice trembled at first, but I forced it out, clear and firm, each word a step into the light. "I'm proud to be his mom," I said, looking at no one in particular, my gaze steady on the far wall. "I don't need your pity or your laughs." The words felt like untying a knot, each one loosening the grip of their scorn, freeing something I'd locked away. I glanced at Amanda, her lips parted in surprise, her wine glass still, and kept going. "You don't get to decide what my life means," I said, my voice gaining strength, rising like a tide. "Lucas is my choice, my joy, not a burden." The room stayed quiet, the band's instruments silent, their strings still, and I felt the air shift, like I'd claimed a space they'd tried to erase, a corner of the world that was mine. I turned to Mom, her eyes glistening, her hands frozen on her napkin, and my heart ached, but held firm. "I needed you to stand by me," I said, "not join them." My words soft but heavy, carrying years of unspoken hurt. Her hands froze and Carl looked away, his earlier bravado gone, his glass abandoned on the table. The words weren't loud, but they carried each one a brick in a wall I was building around Lucas and me, a boundary they couldn't cross. I wasn't yelling, wasn't begging, just stating a truth I'd buried too long. A truth that felt like reclaiming my own voice. Clara stood near the wall, her tray lowered, a faint smile breaking through her usual calm, her eyes bright with something like pride. It was subtle, but it fueled me, a reminder that someone saw my strength, even when I doubted it. I glanced at Nathan, his nod small but steady, his face open, and felt a surge of gratitude mixed with resolve. This wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was enough, that I'd always been enough. My legs felt unsteady, but I stood taller. Lucas's weight, a comfort, not a burden, his warmth, a shield. I scanned the faces, Rachel's wide eyes, Harper's fidgeting hands, Harold's scowl, and realized their judgment couldn't touch me unless I let it. The spark inside me flared brighter, a fire I hadn't known I carried, and I knew this was only the beginning, a step toward reclaiming my voice in a room that had tried to silence it, a world that had tried to make me small. My words hung in the air, sharp and final, as the banquet hall stayed locked in silence, the stillness almost tangible. Lucas nestled closer, his tiny hand brushing my arm, his fingers soft and warm, and I felt a surge of strength like I was drawing it from him, from the love I'd chosen. Amanda shifted in her seat, her earlier confidence gone, her fingers twisting the stem of her wine glass, the crystal catching the dim light. I held her gaze not with anger, but with a quiet certainty I hadn't known. I had a resolve that felt new and unshakable. This wasn't just about tonight. It was about every moment I'd let their words define me, every time I'd shrunk to fit their story. I took a step forward, my shoes soft against the polished floor, the sound swallowed by the hush. I faced the room, my heart steady, despite the weight of their eyes. I've spent years hearing how I'm not enough. I said, my voice steady now, each word deliberate like stones laid in a path. But I'm done carrying your version of me. I looked at Rachel, her eyes darting away, her earrings still, and Harper, who clutched her fork like a shield, her knuckles pale. Their discomfort was palpable, a tension I could feel, but I wasn't here to shame them, just to free myself, to step into a truth I'd hidden too long. I turned to Nathan, his face open, almost relieved, his hands resting lightly on the table. I helped you because it was right, I said, not for applause, my voice quiet but firm. It was a truth I'd never voiced, a piece of myself I'd kept hidden to avoid their judgment, locked away like a secret shame. Saying it now felt like shedding a weight, like I was stepping into a version of me that didn't need their approval, a woman who'd chosen kindness over fear. Nathan nodded, his lips tight, and I saw respect in his eyes. A warmth I hadn't expected, a bridge I hadn't known I needed. Then I faced Amanda again, her expression a mix of shock and something softer, maybe regret, her hands still in her lap. Your words hurt. I said, not to wound her, but to make her see my voice steady, but not cruel. I'm not your cautionary tale. I'm a mom, a sister, a person, and I'm enough. Her eyes dropped, and for the first time I saw her falter, the queen of the night stripped of her crown, her confidence unraveling like thread. It wasn't triumph I felt, but a quiet release, like I'd set down a burden I'd carried too long. Ethan's voice broke the quiet, soft but clear, from the back where he stood in his wrinkled jacket, his hands in his pockets. I'm sorry, Sarah, he said, stepping forward, his steps hesitant but sure. I should have been here. His apology caught me off guard, a crack in the wall between us. His eyes carrying a weight I hadn't seen before. I knotted my throat tight, feeling a flicker of hope for us, a fragile thread. But this moment was mine, not his to share, not yet. I adjusted Lucas, his head heavy on my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck, and felt the room's tension ease like a held breath, released the air softer now. Clara clapped softly from the sidelines, her hands barely making a sound, but her smile was a beacon bright and steady. I didn't need the whole room to cheer. Her quiet support was enough to remind me I wasn't alone, that there were eyes that saw me for me. I set my bag down, no longer planning to flee, its strap untangled now, and looked out at the faces, some guilty, some stunned, some still hard, their expressions a map of their unease. I didn't need them to change. I'd changed, and that was enough. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a fierce, quiet pride, a fire I hadn't known I could carry. I kissed Lucas's forehead, his warmth my anchor, and stood still, letting the silence speak. It was heavy, not with their judgment, but with my truth, and I wasn't letting it go. The banquet hall felt emptier as the final notes of the waltz faded, guests gathering their coats, their murmurs low and cautious, like they were stepping around broken glass. I stood by my table, Lucas heavy in my arms, his blanket brushing my wrist, soft but worn from countless nights. My words had shifted, something left a crack in the room's polished surface, a fracture in their carefully curated narrative. The family's faces were a mix of unease and quiet. Their usual chatter stilled, like they were afraid to break the spell I'd cast, their eyes darting or fixed on the floor. I didn't move, didn't sit, just held my ground, feeling the weight of what I'd done, a weight that was mine to carry now. Nathan approached, his tie slightly askew, his steps deliberate, his shoes clicking softly on the floor. He stopped a few feet away, his voice soft, almost reverent. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything," he said, his eyes earnest, carrying a strain, like he was wrestling with his own guilt for staying silent so long. "I'm sorry it took this to make me speak up." I nodded, my throat tight, grateful for his honesty, but worn thin by the night, my energy fraying at the edges. His words didn't erase the years of silence, the countless gatherings where I'd been invisible, but they were a start, a fragile bridge between us, built on a truth I'd kept hidden. I glanced at Amanda, still seated, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. She didn't look at me, her gaze fixed on the tablecloth, its crisp folds now wrinkled, her earlier glow dimmed like a candle flickering out. I wondered what she was thinking, if my words had pierced her armor, or just bruised her pride if she saw me differently now. The thought didn't bring satisfaction, only a dull ache, like I'd lost something I hadn't realized I still wanted, a piece of the cousin I'd once loved. Mom stood, then her purse clutched to her chest, her scarf slipping as she crossed the room to me, her steps unsteady. Her eyes were wet, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with something raw. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her words fragile, like they might break. "I was scared of what people thought, and I let it pull me away from you." She reached for my hand, her fingers cold, but I didn't take it. "Not yet," my heart cautious. Her apology was raw, but it stirred a wariness in me, a question of whether trust could be rebuilt after so many cracks, so many moments she'd chosen their side over mine. I nodded, my lips tight, and she stepped back, her shoulders sagging, her face a map of regret. Clara moved through the thinning crowd, stacking plates with quiet efficiency, her apron smudged but neat. She caught my eye and slipped a folded napkin under my water glass, her handwriting small but clear. "You're a great mom." The note was simple, but it landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the exhaustion in my chest. A quiet affirmation. I tucked it into my pocket, its edges soft against my fingers. A small piece of armor for the road ahead, a reminder that kindness could come from unexpected places. The room was clearing out, the clatter of dishes, replacing the laughter, the chandeliers casting long shadows. I felt the family's eyes linger, some with guilt, others with resentment, but I didn't care to sort them out. Didn't need their approval anymore. My stand had changed the air, but it hadn't healed the wounds. It had only laid them bare, raw and aching. I shifted Lucas, his breath warm against my neck, his curls tickling my chin, and felt a quiet resolve, but also a bone-deep tiredness, like I'd run a marathon with no finish line in sight. My heart heavy but unbroken. The banquet hall's lights dimmed, casting long shadows across the scattered tables, the air cool and quiet now. I stood by my chair, Lucas's soft weight steadying me as the last guests trickled out, their footsteps echoing faintly. The air felt thinner, like the room was holding its breath after my words, a fragile pause in the chaos. I scanned the faces still lingering, searching for something, regret maybe, or understanding, but most avoided my gaze, their movements stiff, as if my presence had rewritten the rules of the night, shifted the ground beneath them. Rachel approached, her heels hesitant, her purse clutched like a shield, its leather creased from her grip. She stopped a few steps away, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Sarah," she said, her eyes flickering to the floor, avoiding mine. "I got caught up in the talk. I'm sorry." Her words were careful, but they lacked weight, like she was apologizing to save face, not to mend anything, her earrings still as she spoke. I nodded, my expression blank, and said, "I hear you," my voice flat, offering nothing more. She waited, maybe expecting me to soften, but I had nothing left to give, my heart too raw. She turned away, her shoulders tight, and rejoined Mark, who hadn't looked my way, once his back a wall of indifference. Ethan lingered near the exit, his hands in his pockets, his jacket rumpled from his late arrival. He took a step closer, his voice quiet but firm, carrying a weight I hadn't heard before. "I'm sticking around," he said, "for you and Lucas. I want to do better." His eyes held a sincerity I hadn't seen in years. A flicker of the brother who'd once stood up for me, and it stirred a cautious warmth in me, like a door creaking open after being locked too long. I managed a small smile, but my heart stayed guarded, knowing promises were easier than change, easier than showing up. He nodded as if he understood, and stepped back, giving me space, his silhouette soft against the dim light. I noticed Harper by the dessert table, alone now, her plate untouched, the cake crumbling under her fork. She glanced at me, her lips parting, but no words came, her eyes darting away. Instead, she busied herself with her purse, her movements jerky, like my words had unraveled her composure, stripped away her ease. I didn't feel triumph, just a hollow ache, realizing how far we'd drifted from the cousins who once shared secrets under summer stars, our laughter lost to time. The staff began folding tablecloths, their motions brisk, signaling the night's end, the fabric rustling softly. Clara passed by her tray, empty, and paused just long enough to meet my eyes, her braids still against her shoulder. Her nod was subtle, a silent acknowledgement that carried more weight than Rachel's apology, a quiet strength that steadied me. I slipped my hand into my pocket, feeling the napkin she'd given me, its edges soft against my fingers. A small thing that felt like a promise. It reminded me there were people who saw me, not the story they'd written, not the failure they'd assumed. I looked down at Lucas, his eyelashes fluttering in sleep, his face peaceful, untouched by the night's weight. I felt the toll settle in my bones, a deep exhaustion, like I'd fought a battle I hadn't planned. My stand had shifted how they saw me, but it hadn't filled the cracks they'd left, hadn't healed the wounds that still ached. The room was nearly empty now, the chandeliers dim, the laughter gone, replaced by the soft clink of dishes. I adjusted Lucas's blanket, my hands steady, but my heart heavy, like I'd won a battle but lost something quieter, something I couldn't name, a piece of myself I hadn't realized I'd been holding on to. A week after the engagement dinner, I sat on the worn couch in my apartment, the morning light filtering through thin curtains, casting soft patterns on the hardwood floor. Lucas was sprawled on the rug, stacking colorful blocks, his giggles soft against the hum of a distant lawnmower, a sound that felt like home. The quiet felt like a gift, a stark contrast to the banquet hall's clamor, its polished chaos. I sipped coffee, the mug warm in my hands, its bitter edge grounding me, and let my thoughts settle, tracing the path from that night to now. Something had shifted inside me, like a river finding a new course, steady and unhurried, carving its own way. I'd taken Lucas to the park yesterday, his small hand in mine, as we wandered past swings and blooming dogwoods, their petals drifting like confetti. He'd chased a butterfly, his laughter bright, his sneakers kicking up dust, and I'd watched, my heart lighter than it had been in years, a warmth spreading through me. The world felt different, not because they'd changed, but because I'd chosen to let go. I wasn't carrying their words anymore. I'd set them down, and the freedom was startling, like stepping out of a too tight dress, the fabric no longer binding me. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, Amanda's name flashing the screen's light sharp in the soft morning glow. I hesitated, my fingers hovering, then opened the message. She invited me to her wedding, her tone stiff like an obligation, the words lacking warmth. I read it twice, searching for sincerity, but found none, only a formality that felt hollow. My thumb hovered over the reply, and I typed thanks, but I'll pass my fingers steady, the decision clear. I didn't need to be there, didn't need to prove anything, didn't need their stage to feel whole. The choice felt clean, like closing a book I'd outgrown its pages worn, but no longer mine. I set the phone down and leaned back the couch, creaking under me, its springs familiar. Lucas knocked over his blocks, clapping at the chaos, his joy unfiltered, and I smiled, marveling at how he found delight in small things in the tumble of colors. I wanted that for him, always a life where he knew his worth, without fighting for it, without proving himself to anyone. I pulled a notebook from the side table, one I'd bought on impulse, its cover soft and blue, and opened it to a blank page. My pen hovered, then moved, writing, "Dear Lucas" at the top, the ink steady. I wanted him to know someday that strength wasn't just surviving, but choosing to love, to keep going, even when the world pushed back. The words flowed simple but heavy about the night I'd stood up, about the people who'd hurt me, and the ones like Clara who'd reminded me I wasn't alone. Their kindness, a light in the dark. I wrote about his smile, how it pulled me through a beacon I followed, and promised he'd never have to prove himself to anyone that he was enough. My hand cramped, but I kept going, the act of writing like a quiet rebellion, a way to anchor us both, to build a legacy of love, not pain. I paused, glancing at Lucas, now lining up his blocks in a wobbly row, his focus intense. The sunlight caught his curls, turning them golden, and I felt a stillness settle, like the world was holding its breath for us, a moment of grace. I wasn't healed, not fully, but I was here, breathing easier, ready to meet whatever came next, my heart open, but steady. The apartment was quiet now. Lucas's blocks abandoned as he curled up beside me. His breathing slow and even. His warmth a comfort against my side. I set the notebook aside, its pages filled with words I hoped he'd read someday, a map of our journey. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I didn't mind. The stillness felt sacred, like a moment I'd earned, a pause I'd carved out. Outside, a neighbor's wind chimes tinkled faintly, a soft reminder that life kept moving, even after the storm, their notes carrying on the breeze. Ethan knocked softly, his silhouette filling the doorway, his jacket slung over one shoulder. He held a small toy truck, its red paint chipped, and grinned as Lucas stirred, reaching for it with sleepy hands. "Mind if I hang out?" He asked, his voice tentative but warm, carrying a hope I hadn't heard in years. I nodded, gesturing to the couch, its cushions sagging but familiar. He sat awkward at first, and we talked about nothing, heavy old movies, his new job, the way Lucas loved anything with wheels, his tiny fingers clutching the truck. But beneath the small talk, I felt a thread weaving back together, delicate but real, a connection we were rebuilding step by step. I didn't push for promises. His presence was enough for now, a start I hadn't expected. I stood to make tea, the kettle's hum filling the space, a steady rhythm. As I poured, the steam rising in curls, I found an envelope tucked behind the canister, its edges yellowed, the ink faded. It was a letter from Greg, written a year after he left. Words of regret I'd never answered, their weight heavy in my hand. I'd kept it not out of hope, but as a reminder of what I'd survived, a marker of pain I'd carried too long. Now I carried it to the sink, struck a match, and watched it burn, the flames curling the paper into ash, their heat sharp against my skin. The smoke stung my eyes, but I felt no anger, only release like I'd finally let go of a weight. I'd forgotten I was carrying a shadow I no longer needed. I returned to the couch, tea steaming in my hands, its warmth spreading through my fingers, and watched Ethan play with Lucas, their laughter a quiet melody, soft and unforced. My heart didn't race anymore when I thought of the dinner of Amanda's wedding or Mom's faltering apologies. I'd face them not to win, but to stand in my truth, to claim a space for myself. That was enough. I leaned back the couch, soft beneath me, and looked out the window, where the first stars were blinking awake, their light faint, but steady, like the life I was building, one moment at a time. Months had passed since the engagement dinner, and I was finding my rhythm in a new job at a community center, organizing after-school programs for kids, their chatter a bright chaos. The work was messy, spilled paint, sticky fingers, endless questions about colors and shapes. But it felt honest, like I was building something real, something that mattered. Lucas was thriving, his chatter filling our mornings as we walked to daycare, his backpack bouncing with every step, his sneakers scuffed from play. I'd catch him waving at strangers, his grin wide, his eyes bright with trust, and feel a quiet pride knowing he was growing up unafraid to be himself, his joy a gift I'd fought for. On weekends, I started running along the river trail near our apartment, my sneakers pounding the gravel, the water's ripple a steady companion, its surface catching the morning light. It wasn't about fitness. It was about moving forward, each step a choice to keep going, to claim my own path. I'd pause at the old oak by the bridge, its branches heavy with summer leaves, their shadows dancing on the ground, and breathe deep, letting the ache of the past slip further away like dust settling. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I was running towards something, even if I couldn't name it yet, a future I was shaping. One Saturday, I joined a group of single moms at the community center. A casual meetup over coffee and mismatched mugs, the air warm with shared stories. I shared my story, not the whole thing, just pieces: the dinner, the laughter, the moment I stood up, my voice finding its strength. Their nods and quiet hms felt like a warm blanket, wrapping me in understanding, a community I hadn't known I needed. One woman, Tara, talked about her own family's judgment, her voice cracking, but steady, her hands wrapped around her mug. I listened, really listened, and realized I wasn't alone in carrying that weight. That pain wasn't my story alone. My words when I spoke came easier, like I'd practiced them in my bones, each one a step toward healing. Back home, I'd sit on the balcony after Lucas was asleep, a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand, its cold biting my palm. The city hummed below car horns, distant laughter, the occasional dog bark, but it didn't overwhelm me, didn't pull me under. I'd watch the skyline, its light steady against the dusk, a constellation of lives I was part of, and feel a calm I hadn't known I could claim. I was different now, not because the world had changed, but because I'd stopped letting it define me. I was Sarah Lucas's mom, a woman who'd faced her pain and chosen to keep building one small moment at a time, each one a brick in a new foundation. I started a small fund at the center named after Lucas to help kids with art supplies or summer camp fees, a quiet nod to the help I'd given Nathan years ago. It wasn't much, just a few dollars here and there, but it felt like planting seeds, like giving Lucas a legacy of kindness, not struggle. As I sealed the first donation envelope, my fingers steady, I felt a lightness, like I was building something bigger than myself, something that would outlast the pain. The evening air cooled, and I leaned against the balcony railing, my breath slow and even, the metal cool against my arms. The stars were faint, but they were there, steady as ever, a quiet promise. I wasn't whole yet, but I was getting there piece by piece, and that was enough for now. One evening, I found myself at a local library event, a small gathering where people shared stories of turning points, their voices echoing softly in the wood-paneled room. I hadn't planned to speak, but when the organizer asked if anyone else had something to say, I felt a nudge, like a quiet call from within a whisper I couldn't ignore. I stood my hands steady, my sneakers silent on the carpet, and told them about the night I faced my family. Not with anger, but with truth. My voice clear and unhurried. I spoke of Lucas, how his love taught me to stand taller, his joy a light I followed, and of the strangers like Clara, whose kindness lit my way, their small acts a lifeline. The room was quiet, their faces open, some nodding, some teary. And when I sat, a woman squeezed my arm, her eyes saying she understood her touch, a quiet connection. That night back home, I tucked Lucas into bed, his stuffed bear tucked under his chin, its fur worn from his hugs. I lingered, watching his chest rise and fall, his breath steady, and felt a gratitude so deep it ached, a warmth that filled the cracks in my heart. I'd built a life not despite the pain, but through it, choosing every day to show up for him, for myself, to keep going. Mom visited sometimes now, her visits cautious, but growing warmer, her smile softer. We'd sit over tea, sorting through old memories, not rushing to fix everything, just letting the moments be. Ethan was around too, his weekly visits a steady rhythm, his laughter blending with Lucas's as they built block towers, their hands quick and joyful. I didn't need perfection from them. I needed presence, and they were trying their efforts, a fragile bridge we were crossing together. I started carrying a small stone in my pocket, smooth and cool, picked up from the river trail, its weight a quiet comfort. It wasn't much, just a reminder that strength could be quiet, unyielding, shaped by time like the river carving its path. I'd hold it during tough days, when doubt crept in my fingers, tracing its edges, and it grounded me, whispering that I'd made it this far, that I could keep going. I wasn't the woman who'd sat silent at that dinner, nor the one who'd burned Greg's letter, her hands shaking. I was someone new, still learning, but no longer afraid to be seen, to take up space. The lesson wasn't loud or grand. It was this: your worth isn't in their eyes, but in the choices you make, when it hurts, the small, brave steps you take. I chose Lucas' kindness, truth, and that's what made me whole, what built the life we have. Pain doesn't define you. What you do with it does, the way you choose to love, to forgive, to keep moving. I learned to forgive, not for them, but for me, to let go of the weight that kept me small, to free myself from their story. That's the freedom I carry now, a quiet strength that's enough. What's a choice you made that set you free? I'd love to hear your story in the comments, to know what moment helped you find your light. If this resonated, please subscribe, or share it with someone who needs it, someone who's finding their way. Thank you for listening, for being here with me. Here's to finding your own quiet strength, wherever you are, wherever your path leads.